2022 was the year for AI, and every artist wants to know what this means for their job. So, as a special episode to close out the year, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the most controversial topic I can think of since NFTs, and then following that, I'm going to give my 7 predictions for what I think we can expect in 2023. AI concerns are understandable. I got a lot of empathy, because 99% of what we've been doing for the last 10 to 20 years seems to be exactly what AI is good at. Technical skill sets, like creating a basic form and then rendering it very, very, very well. That other 1% skill, creating a compelling, unique story, that's the one that a lot of us have neglected, myself included, because technical skills are what the market has demanded thus far. And now we're finding out in 2022 that that's the one that we'll probably need for the future. So essentially, this feels like we are starting our career over again. The time investment that we've made learning these new skills, sometimes over several decades now, feels lost. And you can find screenshots of AI artists relishing this fact, which definitely pisses me and a lot of people off. But do remember that social media will you can always depend on it, promoting the worst in humanity. And you'll find one of these people in every community. Now, the biggest argument against AI right now is that the data sets were trained on copyrighted images. And I'm going to annoy a lot of artists by saying this, but in the long run, I don't actually think it matters. Because eventually, someone is going to release an ethical AI product trained on non-copyrighted images that gets the same results. With the amount of investment in this tech and the concerns around copyright, it's not maybe, but when somebody does this. It'll probably happen by as early as next year, but we'll get more to that when I talk about my predictions at the end. So whether we face it now or later, eventually industry pipelines will change. But to dive into the copyright debate for a moment, we do kind of have to acknowledge a little bit of hypocrisy, right? Because look, if we're all being honest, we know that if the police was to take our hard drive, they would find thousands of copyrighted images, inspiration folders, Pure F boards, Pinterest boards, images from large IP like Blade Runner and Star Wars, but often images ripped from independent artists and photographers without their permission. We literally call this reference. Reference for styles, reference for design choices, and reference for ideas. I've literally sat in the audience of talks at SIGGRAPH as they showed animal reference video that they ripped from YouTube and used for dinosaur walk cycles in Jurassic World. But we accept this because it's not just fair use, but because it's how every artist has learned since the dawn of time. Now, some say you can't really compare the two because computer vision isn't the same as the human brain. And I'm sure they're different, but at the end of the day, it's the same result. If we're both inspired by Lord of the Rings and you draw the individual elements that make up the fantasy castles, because that's how your brain sees it, but then I do it with stippling, starting with random noise that arrives at the same result, is there really any difference? Now, I will say, though, that there is a line. There's always been a line. Artists can go too far by tracing, and AI can overfit to training data, essentially producing images that are not just inspired, but almost an identical copy of the source image. And this has happened, and it is not good. But no one knows this more than AI developers because their product is to produce unique images. And if it fails, users will lose trust in their product. So you can expect that this will disappear over time as it's in their best interest to do so. And I believe with DALL-E, the most mature of all the AI image generators, that it already has, as Shutterstock exclusively accepts them. So we've all been inspiring each other over the years, except now we've discovered we've inspired not just another slow artist, but a very fast machine. And it doesn't feel like a fair fight because it's not. It is unfair to compete with AI, and it's unfair to compete with a calculator because the calculator will always win. But, and this is the crucial point, only when the calculator knows what problem to solve. This is the most important point that I feel is the most overlooked. AI image generators cannot tell you what solution best fits the problem. That's the bit that's still in your control. That's the bit you still need artists for. When non-artists play with a tool like Midjourney, they're usually very happy with the first generation because they don't know what to look for. professionals do. They know that, say, a token grassy landscape won't fit the narrative of a culture in conflict for a movie. So they need to keep thinking through the problems from different perspectives, infusing it with different cultural references, trying different shapes, different compositions, which is why almost every artist that I've interviewed on this very podcast that has used AI in a serious capacity doesn't see it as a threat, because they know there's so much more to good art than just rendering. And that's why I think that reframing technology as an opportunity rather than a threat is often, but not always, definitely, the healthiest mindset. We cannot control the world, we cannot stop innovation long term, but we can control how we react to it. That's the one thing we've got control on. And that's really my main point here. Mounting a crusade right now feels like dedicating an awful lot of energy to delay just the inevitable. The best concept artists I know are leveraging AI, not hiding from it, leveraging it to level up their skills and create better works faster, which at the end of the day is what all artists want. This does mean, though, that we'll have to let go of some things. Certain workflows will be replaced, but again, if we're creating better works faster, most artists want this. So, as you can tell, I think AI is a very fun, very promising tool, but that said, I do not agree with everything that they do. So, for example, they should never have let you cite a living artist's name in a prompt. That was a very poor idea. At least in my opinion, right? Because to artists that are living off commissions, this affected their livelihoods immediately. And narrowing a training data pool like that to such a small degree really blurs the lines between fair use and infringement. Even if it legally isn't, it really feels like it was. So it was really the quickest way to turn artists against them, and it could have been avoided so easily because they went to great lengths to stop you from referencing a person's likeness. So why didn't they stop you from referencing an artist's IP? I can't believe they did that. It's so annoying, but anyways. So if they disallowed this, yeah, it would be a small thing, but it would go a long way into winning artists over to the tools. So I'm saying I'm not signing off on everything that AI does, but I do think we need to acknowledge that AI isn't going anywhere, and it's certainly not going to get any worse. This is the first inning of the first game of the first series, and each one of us will have to make the decision whether we adopt this new tool and level up, or stick to honing a technical skill set that will likely be in less demand in the future. So that's my thoughts. Let me know on Discord whether you agree or disagree. We do have a Discord now. It is at blenderguru.com/Discord. And in there, you'll find an AI debate channel where people are having fiery discussions. And you can join. So go to blenderguru.com/Discord. And I hope to see you there. Now, on to my predictions. First thing, funny thing about predictions, they're almost always wrong, but they're very fun to make. So I run a weekly newsletter called This Week in 3D, which summarizes the most interesting tech and news as it relates to 3D artists. And you can subscribe, by the way, blenderguru.com/This Week in 3D. And because of this, it means that I get to see a lot of tech, and I can start, at least I feel like, I can start to see the direction that things are headed. And this is why I like making predictions. As I said, they're almost always wrong, but they are fun to make. So, as the final podcast of the year, here is my top 7 predictions for what I expect in 2023. Starting with number 1, you could already call it an explosion of new AI. Not really a shocker. This year was just the warm-up. I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see virtually every software package that we use being augmented with some degree of AI. That's why I kind of think it's silly to try to categorize different workflows as this is AI, will not allow it. This is non-AI. Because eventually everything is going to have some degree of AI. Some of it will be generative, like your Mid-Journeys, your Dollies, creating a new image. And then others will be augmenting, right? Taking a tool or a software that we already use and then augmenting it with AI. Perfect example, a lot of Photoshop's tools now, certainly all their new ones, most of them have some degree of neural learning in the background. It used to be lasso select. Now you've just got an object select button. It just looks at the image and goes that's a human, that's a chair, that's a whatever. And you can just click on it and it'll just try to guess it for you. So really this means we're going to be producing work at a faster pace, which means production costs are going to fall, but it also means that workflows are going to be changing at an even faster pace than they were previously. It used to be you would, way back in the day, you'd have to go to a trade show or a conference to learn the new workflow, right? And then YouTube comes along and then the word gets out there faster, right? Well, now with like AI and Twitter and like people are inventing things all the time. It's like they just released like ChatGPT, and then someone figured out that you could ask ChatGPT for a prompt which you could feed back into Midjourney, and then other people start using that, take that image and then feed that back into the data set, and then you can like iterate on that. And it's like people are just coming up with ideas constantly. So something that, I mean, look, if you want to get a job, you want to stay employed, the one thing you can do is just try lots of stuff, be on Twitter groups, be on my newsletter, This Week in 3D, stay up to date, abreast of all of this stuff. And because your employer will want it. They don't want to have, basically, they don't want to waste money, right? You wouldn't want to waste money. If you hired a plumber, you wouldn't want them using the wrong tool, and they don't want you using the wrong tool either. So you don't want to be the person that doesn't know a new workflow. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be stuff you don't know, but it helps to stay abreast. For example, one of the guys we got at Polygon, he loves it. He's like, everything he does is AI. He's tinkered with everything, does a little bit of programming. He's a tinkerer. So if there's anything to do with it, he knows of all the pros and cons of each approach. And it's like, it's great. That guy knows everything. And we know for sure that the workflows that he's learning are going to be useful at some point in the future. So there's a book, The Linchpin, by Seth Godin, who talks more about this, but like being a valuable employee is about that kind of that tinkering and trying to get the most, trying to give your employer the most value, essentially speaking. And that's what learning some of these workflows are. Anyways, went off on a tangent. Number 2, ethical AI. I already mentioned this, but with so much controversy surrounding a lot of these AI models, I think some companies are probably going to hold off from using them, and founders and investors know this. So I think we'll likely see rival companies this year promoting their data sets that were built on copyright-free images. As I said, I don't think it's a matter of if, but a matter of when. I think it will happen. And that's just going to be maybe a second market, and maybe if it was regulated a lot, that might be the only market, which leads me to point number 3, AI regulation. So governments are very slow, but they're just starting to wake up to the power of AI. There's actually a website, it's oecd.ai, and that will actually show you like all the regulations around AI with like a map of the world, and you can click it and it's like, man, like the US has 66 policies regarding AI at the current moment. And that, I'm sure, will skyrocket in the coming year. So, you can expect regulation. Now, some of it, obviously, regulation is not always good and it's not always bad. Sometimes if it's too heavy-handed, it could stifle local innovation. But when it is done well, it could lead to the public's good in the long term. But at the end of the day, also, I think that much like trying to stop the nuke after the first nuke has gone off and then stop other people from developing nukes, it's a global issue. So like, it's kind of the point I was trying to get to, like on Twitter. I was like, you can't stop China, right? Like China, if you put in a regulation that like made it so it had to be ethically trained data sources, like you just have to go to a country that just doesn't care about that. And then like, they're going to use it. And like, I know also like, it's still like, yes, but US industries will not. And so therefore there's a win. But anyways, point is, regulation's going to go up. Anyway, that's my prediction. Number 4, staff count decreases, volume of studios increase. Repeat that. Staff counts at studios, I think, will decrease. The volume, though, of studios in the long term will increase. It's particularly in a transition phase, right? When we go through this like new workflow where costs are plummeting to produce the same content, I think we're going to see, whilst they're replacing workflows, they're still going to have the same budget. So that's the thing. I think it'll be a temporary measure. Like if a game's still, they've got a budget for $200 million, it's like, well, now we've like producing so much more for like in such a shorter amount of time. Maybe the game can be longer. Maybe they can do more with it. The goalposts move. So you have to, it's a moving target, goalpost, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But they've still got, so the big guys will still have those budgets. But I think at the start you will see like, let's say concept art teams, particularly juniors within that, some of those positions will reduce. However, I think with the lower cost, you're going to see a lot more studios and individuals starting productions that wouldn't have otherwise. So I was actually talking with the guy from Luma Labs the other day, just on a phone call, how you do it. It was just random. But he was saying like back in the day, programming, like, I don't know, like 60s, 70s, right? It was so niche. There was only like a handful of people that were programmers in the world. And there was a photo of this, I can't remember the name of him, but he's like standing next to this ream of paper, and it was just to compile code, right? Well, that was a skill set. It was compiling code, and then they released something called a compiler, which does it for you. So that skill, if that was your job at a company, compiling code, it would no longer be in demand. But it's not like that reduced the number of roles. That helped the number of roles in the long term, right? Because you reduced the cost. You made something so tedious go to something automatic that it then made uses for programming go up, right? So think of, for example, like you look at indie games today. It's very rare to find an indie game that actually like looks as good as a AAA game, right? Like the cost of developing worlds is astronomical. Like games like Call of Duty, you can't do it for anything less than at least like $100-200 million, right? The cost of generating all those assets is just, it's astronomical, right? Imagine though if, for example, some of this generative AI, this Point E, OpenAI, I don't know what you're doing with your names, like fire your marketing guy. Point E is what they called it. And it's a 3D model generator. So you type in a prompt like office chair and it gives you a 3D model. It looks horrible right now, horrible. We laugh at it now, but we also laughed at DALL-E, right? Like a year ago. And then it's like, look at DALL-E now. It's like, holy shit. So anyway, imagine that, right? Like if you were an artist in an indie game studio and you like to build a world, if you just typed in city and it generated a city, imagine all of the new applications for that, right? All of the businesses that might want to have their training course or whatever take place in a virtual VR world now, because now they don't have to build, for this everything. Like you could have like teaching instructor, like driving instructors do like courses. I don't know. I'm just trying to think like teachers, right? They could do their next lesson in VR, which they actually reckon is one of the biggest uses for VR of the future is education. But like if the cost of generating those assets was like typing in a prompt, it's now, there's going to be so much more, and you're going to need people to clean up that work. You're going to need not just clean up. I'm not saying like that's what you should aspire to do, but you're going to need good people who understand texel density, poly counts, all that stuff that other people don't in order to take it to the next level. So yes, there might be some of these like would you call it teams, right? Within a lot of large corporations that will, some of those roles as the workflows change, I think you'll see a reduction. But overall, you will now see like indie game developers, there could be now like 1,000x of them, and they could be producing work at AAA quality on a long enough time frame. I'm not saying this is next year. This is maybe 5, maybe 10, I don't know, to get to that phase. But you know what I mean? Like it opens it up. Anyways. All right. So that was number 4, rambling a bit. Number 5, Nerfs entering VFX. So Nerfs stand for neural radiance fields. If you've, been on Twitter, you might have seen people like it looks like a camera move and like, it's like the world, but it looks like a recorded video of a camera, but then the camera's like moving around. Basically, I mean, the way I sort of think of it, it's like photogrammetry, except instead of it building a model, like it's just a different way of doing it. Instead of building a model, it's building points, and then depending on the view of the camera, it's a color value for that point. And then if you've got like the camera taking a photo here and then the camera taking a photo here, it can then interpolate between that point. So you could have an animation of a camera between 2 points when it's only got 2 photographs, let's say, right? So it got widespread attention this year. This is the first year that anyone really started to know what Nerfs were. Ren from Corridor, for example, he started demonstrating how it could one day replace backplates. So in VFX, it's very common if you've got, on set, you've got a shot in a street, but this other actor's not there, or they need to have this other sequence take place on a green screen, you shoot backplates. So you shoot high-res photographs of backplates. Problem is, once a backplate is shot, it's locked into that location. If the camera needs to be lower, if it needs to be from a different angle, you often can't do that, right? Because it was just not photographed on set. Sometimes they have to rebuild it in CG just to change the camera shot, right? Well, if you've got a Nerf, so instead of just taking one single photograph, you go around with a basically like film the entire location, right? Just walk around, just constant movement of the camera, getting every surface. It will capture that. And the interesting thing that makes it so different to photogrammetry is that because it is point clouds and it's like the value of that point changing, it will capture the reflections of information. So it's just natural, right? Like the camera moves down and it gets the light reflecting off the puddle, right? Because it's Nerfs. It's not photogrammetry. It's different. So I think next year we'll probably start to see it used in low budget productions. It still has an issue where it kind of all looks kind of blurry and choppy. But obviously that's going to improve. And so I think you'll eventually start to see it in then mid and then high end budget productions. I think it's very interesting there. So that's Nerfs. Number 6, coming to our last two, VR. I think it will potentially leap forward next year in a very big way, but this all depends on Apple. So Apple, for years, I think like 2016, the first rumors came out that Apple was working on a VR headset, right? And it hasn't come out. And like even like 3 years ago when I was in LA, I was talking to some artists and they're like, there's a studio in LA that is hiring like 300 artists from like some of the top studios in the world. They're working on something and they cannot say what, right? I don't know what it is. Maybe they're making their own IP, their own games for VR so that they can release with some of their own content that is actually good. I don't know. Maybe the VR content currently sucks. I don't know what those artists are doing. But the point is like everybody knows Apple is working on VR. This guy on Twitter, Robert Scoble, who's like in Silicon Valley, he knows everyone, and he's like, it's coming. This year is going to be big. And it's not this year. Maybe next year. So really, it's like, it was really poised for this year. So the fact that it wasn't this year, I'm like, it has to be next year. But anyways, if it does, right, Apple isn't known for its like flash in the pan, like here's a product, take of it what you will, we'll see. They do that only when it's like a real solid investment in a long-term strategy. So if they were to release a VR headset, it would signal to the rest of the world that VR is a thing, right? And I think you would suddenly see like a 10% public increase in interest on the medium. All right, that was number 6. Now on to number 7, Metaverse hype crashes. So they say that the impact of tech is overestimated in the short term and then underestimated in the long term. So an example, social media in like 2008, it was the new buzzword like Web 2.0, right? And it was this new thing. And everyone talked about how it's all going to social media. Social media is going to be huge. It's going to control everything. And it didn't really. For like the next few years, television advertising, people still watching TV. And social media was just kind of this weird, geeky thing on the side, right? It was overestimated its returns in the short term. But long term, it was underestimated. Every one of those tech bros that was hyping it up back then did not even imagine the impact that it would have on society today, right? That now it's being regulated and all this kind of stuff, right? So it's the same with that. It's actually called like the Gartner hype cycle, right? So with the metaverse peak reaching the hype of this year, I think you can now expect it to go through what is called the trough of disillusionment in 2023. So this is basically where it's like, now the hard stuff happens. Like everyone's heard about it. Everyone knew you didn't deliver. And now you've really got to do the hard work for many years to slowly pull it up into something of value. And I think that's going to take like another 5 to 10 years. There's actually a book called The Metaverse by Matthew Ball. And he explained like, basically he kind of puts it as like something is of like, it's the key medium when you could ask it, when your aunt is referencing something she saw in that medium. Now your aunt is referencing things she saw on Facebook, right? Or has been for the last 5 years. He reckons one day your aunt will actually reference something in VR. She'll say that she saw something in VR. That's when it's hit its moment, and he puts that at like 5 to 10 years out. Sorry, not 5, it was actually 10 years for that specific example. So just to give you an idea on time frame. Metaverse not happening anytime soon, but it's not just the Zuck that is like nuts about the metaverse or thinks that the metaverse is anything. A lot of companies do. It's actually like, it's kind of crazy. If you look at the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is this like forum of companies that are trying to set the standards, scroll through that and your finger will get tired. So many companies are investing in it in a huge way. That's just, I mean, it's a free forum, but it kind of gives you an idea of who is thinking about it. Anyways, so that's really it. This is, I guess, a little bit of a shorter podcast than usual, a lot more controversial than usual, that's for sure. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope you continue to listen in the new year. Have a good Christmas. I'll see you in the next podcast.